right, thank you. Welcome everyone. This is our November meeting, and we are, from the looks of it outside, maybe a month or so away from fall starting. Huh? Seems like it took a long time to get here this year. We will we'll get to the meeting minutes in a second. I first wanted to just let everyone know that I appreciate the outreach that a number of you have done to me and to other and to our vice chairs since our last meeting. I've been getting kind of a recurring comment that has to do with the foundational knowledge that we all feel we need in order to discuss and debate some of our key issues. So some of that knowledge is provided throughout the summer and now into the fall, and others like land use and future demographics and things like that will be presented today. And upcoming topics.
Tom, you're cutting out.
Really foundational, like technology, are being.
Tom, can you hear me? Tom, can you hear me? Tom, we are having trouble with your audio and video.
Any other topics that any of you think we need should be provided? Hello?
Hi, Tom. It's Farhad here. You may want to turn your camera off. We're having a hard time. Your broadband is probably
Can you hear me now?
have enough bandwidth. So if you turn your camera off, we might be able to hear you better.
Yeah.
Oh, I think he probably turned the audio off as well.
Yeah, I just
There you go.
turned it off. Farhad, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. It's still a little choppy, but please proceed.
No, I did not.
Tom, if you don't mind, at the bottom of the email, there's a phone number and a PIN number. If you could try that using your phone for your audio, we might be able to hear
All
you
right,
better.
I'm not sure how much folks were able to hear or even what you can hear from me now, but I want to let folks know that you should reach out to us with any positive topics that you
Okay, so Tom, we're still having a hard time with your audio. If you don't mind, try that phone number with the PIN number and use your phone for your audio, please. All right, in the meantime, I think our vice chairs are with us. Mary, are you with us?
Can you hear me now?
There you go, much better. Yes, please proceed.
All right. Again, not sure if you heard anything that I said. Just trust me, it was very good, very, very good. Unfortunately, I don't have that good of a speech lined up that I can repeat it. So we should probably move into our agenda. I just want to make sure that folks know that we appreciate you having reached out to us since the last meeting to provide us with some of your thoughts about how we're doing and what you would like to see us talk about next. We certainly have been working on our foundational knowledge in order to get us to the point where we can have intelligent conversation and debate And so some of those topics that we've already covered, this week we'll be, at this meeting, we'll be talking about some demographic type things and growth and population, et cetera. And soon we'll be talking about technology that are really important, like our discussion eventually about maintenance within our plan. So if you have other topics that you'd like, please feel free to provide those to me or to Paki or to our vice chairs, to Carolyn or Mary, and we'll do our best to get all those in front of us at the right time. Okay, so one other thing I wanted to mention to folks is that we have received a call to the audience comment this week, and it'll be posted to the website. So please take a look at that tomorrow or after it gets posted, and understand what that comment's about. Okay, let's move up to item 2 on our agenda and see if we have any meeting minute modifications that need to be made.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Carolyn?
Yes, it's Carolyn. I just had a comment about this. The minutes, as written, most all of it is really just a discussion about what the staff said. And there isn't really any notes about what, we had a pretty rich discussion, and I guess it's not really reflected here. Is there a way, well, first of all, in the future, it would be good to have more of that in here. And then can the public or any of the members of the committee, is there a way, a place on the website where we can actually and/or are reminded of the discussion that was had at the last meeting?
Well, the purpose of the meetings is to provide a summary of what occurred. They're not minutes that are taken in great detail, and that's why we have the recording. Does that help? That answer your question?
Yes, it absolutely does. And maybe we could put that on the minutes too, a link to that. It would be good to have a little more though focused on the flavor of the committee members and the kind of discussion we're having. I certainly don't want a transcript of the meeting or anything, but just to relay a little more, hopefully in the future. And I think in the future, when we start having these more frequent meetings and it's more committee discussion as opposed to what Tom was saying, we're getting a lot of informational items right now. So that might be more appropriate in the future meeting minutes. But thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chair, it's Arlen.
Yes, Arlen.
Yeah, along with that, since I missed the last meeting and circumstances I couldn't avoid, but it was hard for me to just look at the minutes and figure out where did you all leave off in the conversation as I was trying to prep for this meeting and such. So if there's anything that can be put in the minutes as to kind of like how far you got or in the discussion that was listed, because I didn't get a sense of that. And I thought you were partway through and maybe you got all the way through and they didn't know. So that's just a suggestion for the
feedback that are probably best exercised at those moments. But I'd encourage you to keep track of your questions and comments. So we've left a pretty good amount of time at the end so that we can have a healthy dialogue, understand your concerns, your challenges, where you might need more details and information, and we can take that back and shape our next steps as well. So thank you, and off we go. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Josh. Josh is going to leave his video off just to make sure that you can hear him clearly as he goes through the slides, and then you'll hear from me more later on. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Paul, and Chairman and members of the committee. I look forward to this opportunity to give you an overview of our land use modeling and kind of share the relationship that the land use model and the travel demand model, how they work together to deliver this travel demand forecast. So I'll try to keep it high level, but I'm ready for your questions. So here we go. Our land use model is the 2045 RMAP update. So what is it? What does this express? This really is an expression of our best expectations of what we think the region is going to look like in 25 years, based on the adopted jurisdictional policies and plans. So those comprehensive plans and general plans and any underlying entitlements that may be in the ground right now. We have the ability to run various scenarios. If we just wanted to look at what if we only grew by adding housing units at 1 unit per acre and see what that looked like, or if we only wanted to grow in 6-story towers, I mean, we could look at those extremes, but what's required of us is to move forward with a projection based on those adopted plans and policies. And we facilitated this through our Population Technical Advisory Committee that's composed of members of our jurisdictional partners, planning and development services staff, the folks that are processing those plats and specific plans and all that great stuff. So there are our partners in this exercise. Okay, so why on earth are we looking at land use? Well, ultimately, the output of our land use model is an input of our travel demand model. And the main point of this land use model is to take a very high level number, a projection of growth at the county level, and then break it into and distribute it into smaller geographies. We call those TAZs, traffic analysis zones. So we're taking this one county level number of expected population projection that we receive from the state, and then we break it into sub-county areas, which are jurisdictional partners boundaries, and then we break that further into the smaller geographies, roughly 1,100 areas, and then those TAZs, that's that input for the travel demand model, and that will help inform that'll allow us to then look at future expectations of future travel patterns. So I kind of want to, in order to accomplish that, we need to compile various pieces of information. And on the left-hand side of the slide, and I'll kind of step through this and give you an overview of each one. These are our inputs. And as I had mentioned, those sub-county population and employment projections, those are those numbers that we need to take. We've kind of already broken it. In this example, we've broken it down to those sub-county projections. And the top one, and we'll get to dive a little bit deeper into these two tables after I give the overview here. But in the top one, the population growth projections, you see it's broken out in 5-year increments leading up to 2045. That is indicative or that reflects how we iterate through our model and assign population and assign jobs, and then we process the data, and then we look at 2025 and step through it that way. The next piece, and as I'm going through this, I'm trying to give you examples kind of throughout the region of different areas, but clearly we need to do this for the whole region. And we start with kind of the finest resolution content that we have with that parcel level information. So our existing land use, where do we stand right now? And for the modeling purposes, we really need to kind of separate the residential parcels and the employment parcels. We have a subset of codes that reflect like common areas and easements or utility use that may appear to be vacant, but in fact, we can't allocate new population or jobs onto those areas. So we kind of have that subclass identified along with tribal land, and kind of most and tribal land is handled a little bit differently in consultation with our partners. And kind of the main point of the existing land use is also to give us that vacant land. Where is that developable land that we can allocate the population and jobs to? So starting out with a nice, good representation of the existing land use. Next, we need to have an understanding of what that future land use is going to look like. What are those adopted plans and policies that our jurisdictional partners have stepped through with their comprehensive plan or general plan updates that have gone through public engagement process and through their boards and councils. So we want to make sure we're accurately reflecting the potential land use as dictated in those adopted plans and policies. And what you're seeing in this exhibit on the right is just kind of, we need to normalize it. We need to kind of bring all these various plans and policies and get it in a way that we can kind of consume and process for this assessment. In addition to those plan land uses, kind of complementary to it are specific plans. And sometimes specific plans are very, very specific. Other times they're not specific at all, and they afford a lot of freedom and flexibility for development potential, but they are an entitled, they do reflect rights that the landowners have that can help guide our understanding of what has been invested in developing those specific plans through the public meetings and working with the councils and boards to get adopted. So those are useful pieces of information that we incorporate. So that helps us with that kind of out year. What is growth going to look like? But we have these near-term periods that there's a lot of activity that's taking place that's currently in the pipeline in the development services, where things are happening right now. So we've collected through through researching the web and our collaboration with our jurisdictional partners, what these known projects are. These are going to help inform the allocation of population and employment in those near-term iterations. So for instance, like Hub 3, another tower, you see this cluster downtown in the U of A, there's a lot of activity happening. And we have pretty fine resolution, pretty well described understanding of how many housing units are going to be going in, or how many inns based on some of these more detailed plans. So we want to incorporate that. And examples would be, the Hub 3 tower that I believe is probably complete by now, but at the stage that we're running this process, it was about to do clearing along with the Mark on Broadway. Those give you some examples of some of those. In addition to the known projects, we also have an element of active plats. A plat is a subdivision plan. It lays out the lot configuration for a new single-family residential subdivision to go in, and so that subdivision plat, we know when it's recorded. So we have this understanding of the timing of some of these, and where there's a more recently recorded plat indicates some activity. But we also have, and there's a lot going on in this slide over out in Rancho del Lago, but we have building permits that we gather as part of that population PopTech committee to report up to the state to support those our annual reporting requirements for population estimates. So we have a good understanding of where building permits are being pulled, and so all the green dots on this are some of those building permits since 2010 essentially, and so we can see how complete, and this helps inform that existing land use, what is built out, but what is partially built out. And so we want to treat those subdivisions that are not completely built out but have a couple of lots left. We want to build those out out of the gate. That's indicative that there's a sales office out there. The builder's working hard to complete that portion of the subdivision before they move on to another subdivision. So we've incorporated that reality into our model of the active plats being a very kind of valuable and key piece of information. And those building permits, as a data source, they're useful. And for this example, I'm just showing you kind of like a zoom in on the City of Tucson building permits. And one thing that allows us to do, and we collect those for all of our jurisdictional partners, but as we're looking at City of Tucson in particular, you can see there's that really dense cluster downtown U of A area, but there's also permit activity in other areas of town. And so this helps us kind of understanding some of the rates of adoption of how quickly subdivisions kind of get built out, but they also kind of help us understand the distribution and the type of residential permit, the character of the residential permit activity. And we'll touch on that a little bit later, but this information also helps inform our redevelopment and policy overlays. So these are big blobs that we're kind of showing here from the adopted comp and comprehensive plan with the county and Plan Tucson with the city of redevelopment areas, recognizing we're not just looking at greenfield development per se. There are going to be some land that is not just vacant, that's going to turn into new homes or new jobs, but it may be a parcel that gets rebuilt or repurposed. And so we need to kind of take that into consideration as well. And we do. State lands. For those that aren't necessarily familiar with the development environment in our region and planning, state land owns state trust land is a major landowner in the region, and if you're looking at some of the metrics, you can look at that parcel and say, wow, that's a vacant developable piece of land. But the reality is that's not going to be on the market in order to support the objectives of and the goals of getting the highest and best value out of that land for the state trust. So most of that land won't be coming onto the market, but it is a big tracts of vacant land. So we accommodated that through essentially gradually increasing the potential for development in out years of the model iterations. And for some of the astute observers in the audience, you'll notice that the state lands around the Houghton area are not color coded here. And that was in consultation with our partners at the city, because they were starting to receive some of that pipeline work of some development activity, looking at, and I'm going to mess it up, but the PAD or a PDC out there, indicating that they're going to start to that area is starting to move. So state lands are treated, have a special use. And then now that we have all this vacant land and understanding of the activity that's occurring and the potential growth requirements for it or expectations of it, we also need to kind of consider undevelopable elements. And over the years in processing and working through this, we've identified that something that may look vacant may not necessarily be developable. Cemeteries, landfills, and parks are a clear example. And here's that list of other areas like Tucson Water Storage and Recharge, CAVSARP, SAVSARP. We're not going to put homes out there. So we just want to kind of mask those areas out from the model, saying, hey, that looks like a really attractive place to put something. No, it's not. And then last but not least, the road network and accessibility. This is an input to the model. For each iteration, as we step through, we look at what is that road network going to look like based on the adopted long-range plan. So we have a sense of what what we would expect out there. And so we iterate through that, and to reflect that, there's an accessibility index. And this is just kind of, you know, a very high level overview. The darker purple areas, there's a higher accessibility for population allocation. In the darker purple, and lighter purple is lower. So just, you know, where there's more network, there's more accessibility. And so this is a reflection of that. So here we are. We're about to run the model. This is a pause point that I guess I could address any questions, because we're probably not necessarily going to go back to those inputs. If anyone has questions, we could take them, or I'll pause. Or if not, we can roll through the model run. I'm going to take that as an indication that I should keep going. So now that we have all those inputs, as I mentioned, we kind of step through these progressive allocation steps. Is someone speaking? Okay, I'll keep going. So here's essentially our base population density based on these TAZs, these geometries that you're seeing. They're small. They're based on essentially they're based on interpretation of the underlying land use. So it's not directly driven by population or employment, but kind of an interpretation of both. So the smaller ones, and they kind of equal out based on population and jobs. So as you go out from the center of town, those TAZs get bigger because it's mostly representing a common either vacant land or a common lower density development. So that's why you see kind of the different areas, the size of these TAZs. But here we are 2020, and we'll just step through it. So we start allocating and growing this, and you don't maybe don't pay too much attention to the interim steps, but the point is that we kind of allocate and we step through it. And as we go into the full model run, we have to bring in that travel demand element as well to bring up, to update that network accessibility. And then we'll cycle through here. This is a process that takes about 2 weeks to run from all the way through with each iteration in each step. And so the previous year's vacant land that gets developed will no longer be vacant and accessible in the next period. So, and likewise, so we'll run through and reprocess all those inputs to get a clean set. So as if we're looking at 2040, what is the vacant developable land is not the same as what it would have been in 2020. And likewise, as we iterate through the changing network, it has different pulls and pushes. One thing to note, I just gave an example of how we iterate through this for the population, but we also execute the same allocation for employment within each period. So we do population and employment and all the sectors within employment for each model, and then we iterate to the next one. So with that in hand, we've compiled the best data available. We've scrubbed it. We've interpreted the plans and policies to the best of our ability. We run through the models, and we share this out with our population technical PopTech committee. And then we get their feedback, and we actually iterated through this 3 different times, incorporating their great feedback to arrive at a unanimous approval of the outputs last August. And that's a key piece of this. It's not that we just pushed a button and let the algorithms go. We pushed the button, let the algorithms go, and then shared that content and got a lot of great feedback and tweaked and worked to refine it to better reflect our partners' expectations. And we're able to achieve that through that final model run. So this is definitely an expression of the group's understanding of what's happening in the region. And so that allows us to kind of look at some of these a density exhibit here. So we have on the left is 2019 is kind of our base year, and the lighter shades are lower density, and the darker shades are higher density for population. And on the right-hand side, you can see what that growth looks like in context to the existing. What's change that much, but as you go to the east, you'll see Vail growing a little bit, growing more, and the area along Houghton there growing some as well. Sal Rita's growth moves south, intensifies a little bit, but moves south down along the interstate. The SWIP area in the southwest continues its growth. You move up to Marana, that really has a strong presence in the development that they're expecting and are prepared for in terms of existing entitlements. And in Oro Valley, you see also kind of changes in footprint as it builds out. And then similarly, we have a blob set for the employment where downtown area grows, the down along southeast along I-10, builds out and along relationship with the airport and Raytheon and Port of Tucson, all that great activity and bridges that are happening in those areas. Sal Rita, economic efforts continue, and as we move north up to Marana, their economic development brings in jobs, and in Oro Valley, the Innovation Park continues to attract. So what does all that mean? Why do we do it? Well, that's an input for our TDM, right? Our travel demand model. So, so with that understanding, our best representation of what the future is going to look like, we can then model what that on the left-hand side, we see the kind of current state of segment level congestion, where red is severe and yellow or the orange is heavy congestion based on a volume capacity ratio. And then on the right-hand side, we can look at, well, just bringing in the new population, new jobs, based on our expectations of where that's going to be distributed, what is that going to look like on our roads if we don't build any new facilities? And that's often referred to as our no-build scenario. No build in terms of transportation, but build in terms of single family unit, population and jobs. And you've actually seen this before. You've seen outputs of this. Those are those two squares and those assessment grids that you've been consuming reflect about 24 months worth of work aggregated at a very high level for you to what is that current congestion on the facility and what is that future congestion on the facility. So hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit better understanding of where that came from. Another model output is and this kind of also shows you a little bit the resolution of what we're able to achieve with this model. Accessible jobs by auto within 30 minutes. So on the left-hand side, this is a scenario, that no build scenario. If we just add in those jobs, but we don't modify the network, what does it look like? And then on the right-hand side, it's an accessible jobs by auto within 30 minutes for each one of those polygons when we add in the transportation project. So you can see that more jobs are accessible with that additional investment of the RMAP 2045. And so I've kind of given you that overview of what the jobs, what the LUM and the land use model and the travel demand model, but then we also feed that into our air quality model, the EPA motor vehicle emission simulator model to be specific. Those TDM, those vehicle miles traveled, speeds and travel patterns are the input for the moves model for us to run our required transportation conformity analysis. And Paul will get a little bit more into that in a bit. So that was that overview of the land use model, the travel demand, and then ultimately how it feeds into our air quality, and also kind of gives you a little bit sense of the scale and the scope of the exercise required to provide it. I can address any questions, or I can kind of step into some of the population forecasts if we want to. I'm gonna.
Josh,
Yes.
this is Bruce
Yes.
Wright.
Hey, Bruce.
Does the modeling that you do take into account the kind of projected growth in adjacent areas such as southern Pinal, northwestern Cochise, and Santa Cruz County to account for trade, freight movement, people moving in back and forth to retail purchases in Tucson and so on? Does that kind of growth also impact, or is it taken into consideration as you do the modeling?
You know, that's a great question. So the land use is not necessarily affected by it, because the task is to allocate that county level number, but it is acknowledged as some of those TAZs are outside of our region, and they reflect travel demand, O&D characteristics of contributing areas. So it does have an influence, but it's not as strong as some of the other. It's definitely reflected within the TDM, but it's not as strongly reflected in the allocation of the employment and jobs or in population. And I can and I'll touch on where we get those numbers here in a bit. That may be helpful as well. Was that
Thank you.
sufficient? Thanks, Bruce. Anyone else? All right.
Josh, this is Arlen.
Hey, Arlen.
Hi. So I have two questions. One,
Yeah.
not that there's a lot of it, but we're getting more mixed use development, particularly in the central city. How do you break that down? Because some of that's employment and some of it's population sitting at the same point, or you just do known projects, or do you project projects that may become mixed use at some point? That's one question. And then the other one is in terms of projecting which lands get absorbed over time. Are you relying mostly on the local jurisdictions, or do you have a magic 8-ball that tells you these things?
Great questions. Maybe I'll start with the second one. I just showed you the magic 8-ball.
Okay.
I mean, so I mean that was really kind of the point of the whole exercise is, yeah, we are projecting into the future where development's going to be. And so while it can be guided, it is often, I mean, clearly it's guided by the adopted plans and policies, but people are, making new plans and policies all the time. So, and that's kind of why I wanted to put it out there. This is our best representation of what we expect it to look like based on what's happening now, what's in the new and on the horizon. And that's also that kind of iterative nature and us working with our colleagues that are receiving those specific plan amendments rolling in, or brand new specific plans that are rolling into their jurisdictions, or PDCs or planned area developments that are landing on their review desk. That's where that relationship kind of really improved the performance of our model over every iteration that we stepped through. So, and I mean, there are certainly algorithms and suitability scores and all sorts of resolution I didn't necessarily go into for this presentation that contributes to where we would expect it to occur based on all those inputs. But at the end of the day, those were all kind of had a reality check as we step through iterations. And to get to your the first question, mixed use is certainly facilitated. It's a parcel is not binary in that it can only be jobs or only population. Keep doing that. And is definitely reflected within, as it's expressed in those adopted policies and plans. Those help guide it. So we're not going to put a mixed use development where there's a SFR subdivision planned, but where Pima Prospers or Plan Tucson or Marana's general plan of, we do them all, so I'll spare you from me listing them, will reflect that. And that is definitely expressed in the model.
Thank you.
And the outputs. Thanks, Arlen. Anyone else have any other questions? All right, I'll step into the population forecast. So, population forecasts are key. And so we're going to kind of come back to this slide, but for the purposes of this portion, let's focus on the left two graphics. Our current population when we started this exercise is just over 1 million people. The 2045 population growth is expected to be 1.22 million. That's a lot different than we've seen in the past. And so we then interpret that into our expected number of households. Those population projections are coming from the state. It is a number that our Population Technical Advisory Committee advises and shares feedback as the state demographer is working through the numbers. But ultimately, it's the Arizona Office of it. All right, I knew I was going to mess this up. Arizona Office of Economic Opportunities numbers that are reflected here. So let's jump into them. So 2010. So this is an expression of the population estimates going back to 1990, and the growth that occurred in the 90s and the early aughts has changed since the Great Recession. We kind of hit a plateau there, but then things started to move again in 2010. And it wasn't just 2008 where, 2008 is where we kind of reached a point, and our rate of growth has changed, and that has been reflected. And and Arlen, to your point, well, you were asking about mixed use. What I'm sharing with you here is those green dots that we have across the region. Well, this is the jurisdictional level summary. So unincorporated Pima County total housing unit permits since 1990. You can see that growth, and then you can see what happened in that Great Recession. And we've seen growth. We're coming out of it, but it's at a different rate. It's at a different nature. And another element of those permit activity, we can evaluate whether it's single family or multifamily. In Pima County, while they're seeing some multifamily, is still predominantly, and I'm sorry, these numbers are tiny, 85% single family, and that's closer to what we've seen in the past. City of Tucson, on the other hand, and the pie charts on the right are from 2010 to 2017, kind of looking at what's this new era look like. City of Tucson, on the other hand, is seeing a dramatic increase in those multifamily units, where that represents 40% of the total permits processed. But still, those SFR units out there, they're sitting at 60. And just, I could fit 2 jurisdictions in here. Well, these are our 2 highest number of permits in the region, jurisdictions with the largest number, but Marana is right there next to City of Tucson in terms, they're just beneath them in the total number of permits they're processing. So that growth of 1.22 million, growth to 1.22 million is reflected here, and it's broken out in those jurisdiction sub-county areas and broken out by period. And so those are those numbers that we're kind of aligning our model to. And this is, here you can see the proportional growth as well. The city and Marana, add almost a similar number, very close to a similar number of permits, but it, as you see at the very bottom, that blue down here is, it's a much greater proportion of Marana's existing inventory. So, and less so of the cities, but still they're growing by close to about the same, but with different characteristics. Now, if we look at this is a net. This is showing you the delta, rather, not the net. This is showing you the delta of growth in our region. So on the southeast, out in Vail, you see Rocking Cave getting built out. And also in the Houghton area, that Saguaro Trails, but also that new state land activity coming in. Down in Sahuarita, Quail Creek on the far east there, and then clearly Rancho Sahuarita is going to continue to grow, and Canoa Ranch further south on 19 in Green Valley County, seeing activity on those platted blocks down there. Heading up north into the west, the SWIP area, Star Valley, Wildflower, and Sandario Pass, all of those entitled specific plans are seeing activity, either a new plats being executed or permits starting to roll in. So we're reflecting that. The central area within Tucson, a litany of projects in the downtown area. I don't know if anybody's been down there recently. I just went down last weekend, and it's continuing. The Rendezvous Flats, the Flynn at La Placida, those are happening, but also La Estancia, and as I had mentioned, Saguaro Trail. So the city has a mix of that mixed use, has a stronger blend of that mixed use activity happening downtown, but also that's SFRs, more traditional single family residential units happening elsewhere. You head up to Marana, Gladden Farms is expected to continue to build out. Sanders Grove, villages at Tortolita, these are all existing entitlements that are moving. And Oro Valley, Rancho Vistoso builds out. And this gets us to that exhibit that you just saw. With those growth, and this is showing you that growth not just by itself, but in context to what's already distributed. Okay, employment forecasts. So similarly, we're going to look at this high-level county number of essentially an additional 100,000 new jobs coming in, and we need to break it out by those sub areas. We're taking this high-level number from the Economic and Business Research Center at Eller Business School. And we kind of work through this with our partners. And so we're kind of looking at, what are different growth rates and getting consensus with our partners on this, on these distributions. One additional element, so this shows you kind of that share, the proportional share. One of the additional elements that we need to think through with employment, the travel demand model needs more than just saying, hey, there's a job here. It needs to know, is that an industrial job? Is that a retail job? And so these columns here break down industrial, retail, wholesale, FIRE, which stands for finance, insurance, and real estate type jobs, service, and then public sector jobs. And the reason why these different sectors are broken out is because they have different travel patterns. And so a grocery store is going to attract more trips than, say, an industrial site that may just have more of a standard commute pattern as opposed to kind of continuous activity. So those are really important, and we need to interpret that as we need to implement that as we interpret the adopted policies and plans. And so similarly here, this is showing you that delta. Where are those jobs going? And the downtown area, U of A, is expected to experience growth. And then as we move southeast along the interstate, we have the bridges building out and attracting the growth in and around Amazon fulfillment with Port of Tucson and along the interstate there. And Raytheon, Sahuarita has activity in their town center along with the new innovation Park, and so we have some representation down there. Similarly, up in Marana, and their economic development efforts continue, along with Oro Valley Innovation Park there attracts jobs. And that gets us to this blob that you'd seen before that shows you kind of what that looks like in context to the existing distribution of employment in our region. And now I'm about to hand it over to Paul to say, well, so now what? What do we do with all this? Does anybody have any questions that haven't been touched on, or be happy to address anything regarding the land use model and how it relates with the travel demand model?
No, but you're doing a wonderful job, Josh. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Hello, Tom Bush.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, Tom Bush here. I just have a question.
Yes.
I see the the development, the number of homes, and particularly on the employment. Now, I know when you break it down through various sectors, public service versus retail, et cetera, you get some idea, but there's any kind of general income that's related to these in terms of the cost of the homes, in terms of or apartments and things of where they're developed versus the value of the jobs that are expected in certain kinds of areas. And it would seem to me that some of those would determine travel patterns and what people use to move from one place to another.
There is a litany of socioeconomic, that's a great question. Thanks for asking. I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge it. There is a tremendous amount of socioeconomic variables that are that back up all of those numbers and assumptions that we're baking into those. So that is accounted for, but you know, that's kind of getting into some of the rhizomes of this and what of the model, and so I don't necessarily have that available to kind of convey to you, but those are taken into consideration, very much so.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Any other questions? All right, Paul, all you.
Nicely done, Josh. Thank you. And if you do have questions as we get into the travel demand forecast portion of this, please let us know at the end or when we have an appropriate break. But as you can see, the foundation is imperative that we put the time and energy into getting the land use, population, and employment data as dialed in as we can get it. And so the team really does a great job iterating through that process in order to have that really solid framework on which we can begin to explore travel patterns throughout the region. So as we turn to the travel demand model, it's important for us to understand what we can look at and what is not necessarily going to be evident in the resolution of a regional travel demand model. So we know that we can estimate future traffic on the region's roadways. We are looking at the regional scale network itself. So we have information, the TAZs or traffic analysis zones that Josh shared. Those are the ones that are bigger on the outskirts and smaller on the more urban areas. Each of those work together with the detailed information and characteristics of the network that we have coded into our model that has an understanding of how many travel lanes we're looking at, the area type, whether it's urban, medium urban, low urban, rural, what kind of roadway class we're looking at, whether we're dealing with a freeway, a ramp, a major or minor arterial. All of that information is in the roadway network, posted speed limits and things of that nature. we are looking at a regional scale here. So we're looking at trip origins and destinations throughout the entire region, based in large part on the land use, employment types, and other socioeconomic factors that Josh had mentioned. And effectively, the model steps through its traditional 4-step process of trip generation, how many trips are going to be produced and attracted throughout the region over a particular time period. Trip distribution, where are those trips going to and where are they coming from? The model makes assumptions on that based on the foundational data of land use, employment, and population distribution throughout the region. Mode choice, how will the trips be made? We'll get a little bit into that later, but we have to have a firm understanding of what kind of travel is taking place throughout the region. And assignment, what route are the trips going to take? We're going to see a variation certainly, but it's a model that assumes the fastest, lowest impact route from point of origin to destination. This is a tool. It doesn't make the best decision for us. It doesn't say that's the best one and you should go with that. It provides evaluation of impacts on that regional scale. As I mentioned, it is region-wide travel. It's not looking at localized travel, and it's not really traditionally used for individual project-specific impacts. We get to understand the impacts of a package like a 2045 RMAP or a 5-year transportation improvement program or various packages for consideration for the next RTA. Looking at exclusively one project is not really going to provide the scale of impacts that you might desire because we are at the regional level here. So one of the more valuable outputs of the regional travel demand model, and Josh got into this a little bit, is understanding where we anticipate seeing traffic congestion throughout the regional network. What we're showing here is on the left is a 2045 no build scenario, assuming that the projects in the 2045 RMAP are not built, and that's what's modeled there. And on the right side, we see a 2045 build scenario. What you see on the right side reflects a $15 billion investment over that entire period, looking at all fund sources, including an anticipation of a renewal of RTA Next. It doesn't necessarily dictate this part is RTA Next, this part is federal funds, et cetera. That's not really what we're doing here, but it does factor in the continuation of that fund source to help fund that total $15 billion package. So as Josh mentioned earlier, we have seen some changes to the way our population is growing, and that is also reflected in the trend line that we see for total vehicle miles traveled, or VMT as we like to call it. We do see some variation over the years, and that's an issue of some of the data. It's kind of difficult to get good data and accurately understand how many vehicle miles are being traveled throughout the network. It is getting easier with new data sources that we see, but what you see there is the mirroring of that trend line that mirrors that population growth. Again, we see that change that's taking place just after the Great Recession, where our growth pattern reflected in both population and vehicle miles traveled has changed a little bit. So as we turn our attention from that, we start to look at how many miles are being traveled. Now it's important for us to understand where this travel is taking place. The PAG region is somewhat unique in that it's carrying the vast majority of that vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, on its arterial system. So traditionally, we've been in the range of 70 to 75% of all that vehicle miles traveled being carried on the arterial network. When you look at comparable metropolitan areas, like the Phoenix metropolitan areas and many others, you're seeing that more in the 60% of total vehicle miles traveled being carried on the arterial system, and roughly 40% or more being carried on a freeway network. We have different challenges here. We have to recognize that, and we have to plan accordingly. So turning our attention from where our travel takes place, we look at how we travel throughout. Our trip types by mode are seen on the far left, and the pie chart in blue. That is the current mode split by census data that tells us that 84% of commuters are driving to their destination, 10% are walking, 4% are taking transit, and 2% are bicycling. That's in this region itself. On the far right side, what we have there is the mode split by trip type target for 2045 that was set as part of the original 2045 RMAP long range transportation plan. And that target was a reduction of the total drive trip type from 84% to 80%, and a growth in walk, transit, bike up to 20% of the total. As we look at that through the lens of modeling and examine it in person miles traveled, we see that the person miles traveled is even higher than the current 84% of the mode split by trip type, and is reflecting 93% plus of all of the person miles traveled in the region. So that's important to keep in mind as we look at potential solutions moving forward. So what does all of this travel mean for each of us? On average, we're each commuting roughly 22 minutes. This comes from major employers data set that we have here in the region. This commute time is relatively stable. It has been growing over the years steadily, but it has been at a manageable 18 to 22 minutes over the last several years. So we're not seeing huge spikes in this commute time. Part of that is due to the reliability of that arterial network that I talked about just a few moments ago, whereby there's a lot of opportunities for alternate routing selected by drivers to get to their destination in a reasonable time. So that is part of the value and benefit of an arterial network with lots of options. When we look at our daily vehicle hours traveled per capita, we're looking at just over 32 minutes. Compare that to our average transit travel time of 55 minutes. We see there, we recognize that traveling throughout the region by transit is a bit more challenging. That's to be expected, but we need to keep a close eye on that transit travel time so that we can keep that in a good spot, and we can make sure that we can deliver reliable transit service and reliable trip time for transit passengers as well. And then finally, as we look at how many miles we're traveling per capita, we're traveling about 21 miles daily per person. So those are just some of the higher level things that we like to provide for you and look at. As we look at some of the outputs of our data analysis efforts and our modeling, we can provide information about traffic volumes, both current and future, but it's important to realize that that's not necessarily the best way to consume the data outputs from our modeling efforts. And so a better way to kind of digest that is, what is the model telling us about where anticipated traffic congestion may be as we look at a no-build scenario or a particular transportation package? This is where the real value begins to be provided, where we can understand where congestion may begin to rear its ugly head and what the nature of that congestion may be. Is it due to a facility that just can't handle loads, or is there more to it than that? And that begins kind of the examination process of examining what kind of projects may be appropriate to address that. Again, Josh told you earlier, this is one of the output measures that we are providing to give some perspective on the current roadway traffic congestion, the volume to capacity of the roadway measure, and the future VC ratio as well. Josh mentioned a little bit of our air quality responsibilities. There's not too much more to say on that, but understand that this too is a regional scale endeavor where we are looking at the modeled air quality impacts of a large transportation package. We're not set up with the regional scale model and our air quality efforts to provide information on the exact air quality improvements of one project that might be built in 2040, for example. It looks at the regional package and provides information about transportation air quality conformity for a long-range plan for 2045 or those larger project packages. So before we go there, I want to make sure that I take a moment to clarify something that's really important to understand about the model, the volume content that we provide from our model. Many of you have experienced the roadway tubes out on the network. That's typically either us or our contractor or one of our member agencies that are collecting field data to give us a better understanding of what kind of volumes are being experienced throughout the network. That is done on a regular cycle so that we can get our finger on the pulse of understanding what kind of volumes are being distributed throughout the network, pull that into the model, and look at the modeled volumes and compare those to what the modeled forecasted volumes will look like as well. These are not exact numbers of exactly 32,322 vehicles are going to be on that roadway in 2045. These are modeled forecasted numbers. So it's important to keep that in mind as we go forward. So just to reiterate, we want to make sure that when we look at the model outputs from a vast majority of our work, those are recognized as a regional scale understanding of land use, population, employment, and travel trends. When we have a need to get in and understand some of the specificity of that, that's typically when we will look at launching a planning study. And so I'm going to go through a few of our recent planning studies just to give you a flavor of what we examine, how we examine it, and some of the outputs that come from those planning study efforts. Many of you are probably familiar with the recently completed long-range regional transit plan. That looked in more detail at existing transit services and began to lay out plans for consideration of what transit service improvements might look like in the future. So that is a great resource that did a great deal of data analysis and discovery to better understand current transit service so that we could put together recommendations for considering what future transit service might look like in the region. In 2018, we conducted a regional freight plan, and within that regional freight plan, there were the issues that Bruce kind of alluded to were examined in more detail to better understand what kind of commerce was coming through our region, either as a pass-through or a destination point, and what kind of commerce was moving out, what kind of freight content was moving out of the region. The plan identified regional freight corridors that were determined to be kind of priority corridors where a lot of freight movement is currently happening and freight reliability is very important. We acquired a great set of data to better understand how freight travel throughout the region is taking place. And what that provided is another one of those performance assessment numbers that you see on the bottom right. That freight reliability tells us how good is the reliability of anticipated travel time by freight vehicles and the actual real travel time that we see from some of the data that we've acquired. So we're able to serve that information up as a point of consideration as we consider what projects might be appropriate throughout the network. In 2014, we put together a regional pedestrian plan. Within that pedestrian plan, we incorporated inventory information about sidewalk presence on regional facilities. That information is being shared up as an output as part of that performance assessment grid. And you've seen a variety of candidate RTA Next projects that show good, fair, and poor sidewalk presence for the facility that's being considered. So that's another value of an output that we've seen within those planning efforts. We've also established a deeper understanding of pedestrian travel itself, what kind of generators are generating pedestrian travel and where that's taking place throughout the region. So we'll certainly continue our understanding as we move forward with that and seek to renew that data and that data analysis as we move forward. In 2016, we launched phase one of a regional transportation safety plan, and that allowed us to better understand some of the transportation safety trends that I provided to this committee earlier this year. And then in 2018, working closely with our member agencies, what we heard was it's difficult to get from understanding that there's an issue there to understanding the details of the safety issue that exists and what to do about it. So we built some analysis platform approaches, worked closely with our jurisdictions in order to serve up level of safety service information for both the signalized intersection network and the regional roadway network. We also built within that analysis tool set the capability for our member agencies to more easily go through the process of developing safety projects to address the specific safety issues that may be taking place throughout the network. Another example of our deeper understanding of the transportation network is reflected in a study that we're involved in currently, where we are looking at the use and value of data that comes through our regional traffic signal network. We're currently consuming some information that comes out of our regional traffic signal network that tells us more detailed information about time plans and turning movements and things of that nature at the intersection level, and can provide for us information on congestion at the intersection level that we don't necessarily see in that regional scale model. So we're serving this up as intersection congestion, good, fair, poor, as represented from an output that we get from the regional traffic signal model. We're additionally looking at the value of the data that's coming out of the traffic signal network so that we can put it to use in our modeling efforts, and our member agencies can put it to use in better understanding some of those details that impact travel at the very localized level, and make improvements accordingly. As we consider those types of things, we certainly have an eye on what we need to do to prepare for transportation technology. The most important thing we need to do is understand that transportation technology is a tool in our toolbox. It is not the tool that will solve everything for us. and it is not a tool that should be squandered or misappropriated. We need to make sure that we understand our challenges and our issues so that we can apply transportation technology at the right locations and in the right manner in order to improve issues like congestion, safety performance, user understanding of the network, traveler information, and efficiency and safety of the network overall. So we've had great conversations with practitioners throughout the region. There's a lot of interest in this area. We need to make sure that we have an understanding of where best to apply transportation technology as we move forward. So we're solving issues and not creating new ones. With that, we're gonna kind of leave it there for you on the technology slide. And we've given you a lot of information today. We'd love to hear your feedback. We know this was a lot of information, fairly high level. There's more to it than this, of course, but we hope that this has given you a good perspective on the region's challenges and characteristics, all the way from land use, population, employment, to regional travel trends and what's facing this region. Mr. Chair.
Hi, this is Larry Hecker.
Hi, Larry.
Go ahead, Larry.
I wasn't able to access my audio for the first 10 minutes, so forgive me if this has already been addressed. There's a 500-pound gorilla in the room called a pandemic, and I'm just wondering if you've given consideration to what transportation may be after there is no pandemic. Will there be a new normal? Will what we saw in 2018 and 2019 be the same as what we'll see in 2022 when it comes to transportation, pedestrians, transit, that sort of thing?
Larry, that is a really fantastic question, and one that has been we've been very concerned with for quite a while now. So the simple answer is we don't know yet, but we are looking at it, and our team of modelers and data scientists are utilizing a wide variety of different data sources that are now available to us to better understand the impacts of the pandemic thus far, so that we might better understand where we might be headed from this. So we did see a distinct drop in vehicle miles traveled, as you can expect, as the pandemic kind of set in and travel restrictions were put in place. Interestingly enough, we've seen that total vehicle miles travel kind of come back into a more normalized level that is similar to pre-pandemic. But what we're seeing is we're seeing a little bit of a different type of travel taking place. So it's not the traditional household to work type of travel. We're seeing different destinations. So we're certainly going to keep our eye on it as closely as possible, because it's going to impact travel trends into the future. We think there will be a return to a more pre-pandemic normalized situation, but it may not exactly the way that it looked before the pandemic. Undoubtedly, we're going to see some shifting in the types of commutes and the telework being embraced throughout the region and throughout the entire globe. So we're going to keep a close eye on that and continue to monitor it. But our VMT has kind of gotten back up, and our travel trends are looking a little bit different, but there's still travel throughout the network. That is for sure.
Thank you.
This is Mel Cohen. I have a question. Whereas bicycles, use of bicycles included in any of those studies?
Thank you for that question. So we did look at bicycle safety, certainly within the safety plan. I know that both bicycle and pedestrian access to transit was a consideration as part of the transit plan, but the pedestrian plan itself was something that looked fairly exclusively at pedestrianism. There were considerations for bicycle travel, but typically either you do those as separate studies or you do that as a collective active modes transportation plan. For the 2014 pedestrian plan, it was rooted a little bit more into pedestrian travel and didn't really explore in too much depth bicycle travel. That being said, we regularly run a regional bicycle and pedestrian count program and have a wealth of data that helps us to better understand where bicycle activity is taking place and some of the challenges associated with that bicycle access and safety performance. So I think we're in fairly good spot in terms of that understanding. As a planner, we certainly want to continue to look into that more deeply when the next opportunity provides itself.
Hello, this is Tom Bush here. I have a question, whether or not that this is as dramatically affecting the Tucson metropolitan area and others as maybe other areas of the country, but and in many respects unfortunate. I think we see trend, and particularly in Tucson, with a lot of this mixed use and a lot of people and apartment buildings and things for younger people to work, and a variety of other kinds of ways. However, there is a large city safety problem developing, aside from the general crime in certain areas, as well as the general population. I mean, the general protest and a variety of other things. As I said before, I don't know that that actually affects Tucson right now, but it is certainly developments from defunding police and et cetera that need to be considered, particularly for inner city growth, because we see larger cities, there's a number of people leaving those large cities in great numbers. And as I said, I don't think this is a big factor in Tucson now, but it ought to be something in the future we look at.
Undoubtedly something to keep our eye on.
Hey, Paul, this is John Bernal. I've got a question.
Hi, John.
Yeah, one of the last slides you showed, I think it was labeled traffic signal, showed a lot of congestion still at many intersections, of course. And does that lead us to think that beyond technology, there ought to be some focused concentration on intersection improvements of some sort in our planning efforts going forward?
That's a great question, John. I guess that depends on who you ask, but I can tell you that we do know that congestion is experienced quite a bit at our localized level, at that intersection level. Our understanding of exactly how that congestion takes place is evolving. So it's really imperative for us to understand, are we looking at AM, PM peak? Are there opportunities to improve time plans to improve that congestion? Or are we facing a capacity restriction issue here? The more that we understand how the signal network works as a whole, the clearer those questions and answers will become. So I think undoubtedly we will have to address the signalized intersection level issues for both congestion and safety. And that, I think, is in part because of that huge reliance we see on our arterial network. We're carrying a lot of traffic on our arterial network. We need to make sure that we're doing it safely and efficiently, and understanding how the signals are working together as a cohesive network is very important.
You know, Paul, what comes to mind is that the bus pullouts that were put into this last RTA program have been tremendous in their improvement. And I just don't know if there's some other similar, strategy out there that we can explore for intersections.
That's a great point. The bus pullouts have really been very helpful. We've always had the desire to make sure that the bus movement through the signalized intersection is done in such a way that it communicates early to the traffic signal controller, so that the onboarding and offboard and boarding and alighting can be done efficiently, and the bus can move as efficiently through its route as possible, as well as the signal. I can tell you that investment in traffic signals over the years has kind of been done in fits and starts. And I think, the same way that we are all needing to invest in our own communications network to make sure that we can telework in the right way, we need to make sure that we're investing in the traffic signal network so that it works as efficiently as it can.
Thanks for the response, Paul.
Paul?
Go ahead.
Yes,
Yes.
Paul, this is Carolyn.
Carolyn?
I had another kind of a follow-up to a couple of previous questions. There's another big gorilla in the room too, climate change. And so over the last few years, I think climate change has become, well, it was urgent and now it's an emergency. So, I mean, according to just about everybody. So I'm wondering, like, some of these goals here are a little modest. It would seem like, are you all looking at this whole changing conversation around climate change and having like bolder or more aspirational goals for these, reducing the miles vehicles traveled or whatever? I noticed that in the RMAP system goals under environmental stewardship, it says environmental stewardship, natural resource protection, and energy efficiency in transportation planning, design, construction, and management. So, I mean, it doesn't seem like we're really headed very far in that direction. I wonder if you were going to be doing anything different, or you can kind of comment on that.
Sure. We certainly see a lot more attention being given there. What I'm showing you in terms of a mode split goal for VMT for 2045, that's largely rooted in the 2016 version of the long range RMAP of 2045. And that was just renewed in an update of 2045 RMAP. As we turn attention to look at the next version of the long range plan that we're going to need to look at, which is something we'll need to get done in the 2024 timeframe, we're going to revisit all of that. And so I think largely what happened in 2016 was landing on a commonplace that was amenable to all of our member agencies and not necessarily going too aggressively in one direction or another. We do hear that there may be considerations by any singular jurisdiction to have a more aggressive target within a city or county or town for climate change initiatives. And we certainly embrace that, and we'll incorporate it into the aggregated long-range regional transportation plan as we can. But I think you're right. We need to look at it. We need to keep our eye on it. And I think both on the public municipal side, we're going to need to do what we can. We're going to see changes from the vehicle industry and electrification and things of that nature that are going to change the profile of emission standards as we move forward. How quickly that's going to happen is a little unforeseen at this point, but we need to keep a close eye on all of that, indeed.
Okay, thank you. Just a follow-up is that 2024 is most likely out past our timeframe for building this RTA next plan. So it would really, I think what you're saying, unless there's a new direction from the RTA board and the jurisdictions, is that it'll be up to our committee if we want to have kind of more aggressive actions than what is suggested in what we just saw, setting your goals, I mean.
I think that's pretty darn accurate, Carolyn. If you want to see a different shape or consideration within RTA Next consideration, I think the CAC is the place to have those discussions.
But thank you.
Hello, this is Tom Bush again. Just a follow-up toward when you were talking about traffic signals on roadways. I think you realize, but I just want to emphasize, there's a limit to traffic signals. There are some intersections that are not just beyond capacity. There are some signal intersections, and I'm thinking in particular mine because I use it a lot, the Ina Thornydale intersection. Whereas before they, when they were just finished with a lot of the improvements they made to that intersection, it got all of a sudden more overloaded than it was before they were finished. So it seems to me that signalization and a few other things are not feasible improvements there, is that we've got to open and do something about the closed-mindedness of a lot of Tucson with bi-level intersections. And that really gets into solutions more than it does with your studies. But I think that there are some intersections that are begging just simply to be connected differently.
Yeah, that's a great observation, Tom. I would also offer that you'll probably recognize that largely our peak period is pretty sharp, and it's not terribly long in duration as compared with some of the larger metropolitan areas. Shifting some of those trips outside of that peak period through travel demand management strategies, whether it be alternate work schedules or what have you, that's another tool in the toolbox that can be considered to try to relieve the burden that's placed on any one intersection in particular, or the network as a whole, so that we can spread that out a little bit and ease the burden of the network handling those heavy loads of traffic. So another thing to look at.
This is Dale
Hey, Paul,
Calvert.
this is Tom. Oh, go ahead, Dale.
Okay. In reference to intersections, et cetera, I know there's been a lot of development in the signal systems, and we need to understand where we are at with signal systems and what particularly the city and the county may be looking at improving signals. I know there's, I've seen a proposed list from the city saying about signal improvements. We need to understand how those things will happen. And this is more of a comment to you, to Tom, than it is to you, Paul. But, that's something we need to think about is, they're changing, evolving as far as the capacity of what signals can do and how much improvements they can do as far as queuing traffic and one thing or another. But I'll be very honest, even though I've spent many years working on these, I'm not sure I understand where we're at and what's possible and what we're talking about. So I think we need to understand that a little bit as we go forward. So.
This is just Tom Bush having a comment on that. I agree with all the improvements. I mean, they're all necessary, and we got to look at exactly what Dale said. But, there's something to consider. If these intersections are hot spots now, and on the smaller intersections, et cetera, we are even more efficiently about producing traffic all heading to these hot spots. We're going to increase these hot spots problems more than we're going to reduce them, because we're going to be able to get more traffic there quicker. And it all comes together to cross over in some kind of way. So, I mean, these are things that we need to look. Capacity is very important here.
Great observations.
Okay, Paul.
Mr. Chairman, this is Diane Shiflett.
Go ahead, Diane.
Thank you. I want to speak to the issue of transit, and I really appreciate the statistics of the average commuting times. You mentioned that driving is 22 and that transit is challenging with almost 55 minutes of travel time. And Paul, you mentioned that that's to be expected, and I was just curious if you could speak to why that's expected And as we go forward with 2045, we have people who will be born in this year of 2020 will be 25 years old, probably members of the workforce, but they may have a complete different sensibility of how they want to get to work or what their work looks like. So when we're looking at transit, is there a way to make that high capacity rapid within our arterials? Has that been addressed?
Thanks for that observation and that question. It has been considered and it is incorporated into the long-range regional transit plan that I referenced. We didn't really bring that information here today as it's more of a sub-element for the RTA next considerations, but certainly something that needs to be looked at. How to deliver high capacity and faster transit throughout the network continues to be a challenge here as well as in all other metropolitan areas. Because you're not looking at that door-to-door service that you get from a vehicle trip, your transit travel time is going to inevitably be higher. And then once you start incorporating the need for transfers from one route to another and the delay time that's involved with the waiting for the next transit vehicle, that number begins to tick up. So transit will almost always be a higher travel time than your vehicle travel time, but the question then becomes what's manageable, what's acceptable in terms of how close can we get it to a vehicle travel time, and what's realistic. So, and what's required in terms of investments to get to that type of target. So the long-range regional transit plan began to explore those types of things and laid out some options for investments on a frequent transit network to provide more reliable service throughout the 24-hour period, as well as high capacity transit, making sure that there's transit providing trips on a frequent basis and getting people to their destination more quickly.
This is Mary.
Okay, Mary.
Paul, thank you so much. The global view of Pima County was amazing. It seems like a lot for me to digest. And I know that as we take our next steps and start narrowing down the projects that we as a committee feel are in our realm of what we feel are important to recommend to the board, we will be able to come back to you and get more definition, more Q&A, and dig down a little deeper into these global pictures that you've presented us with and how they might pertain to the actual projects as we're looking at them being those that we put forward, correct?
We would welcome that. And Mary, thanks for that. That's in part why we tried to bring those performance assessment grids back into the dialogue for you today so that you can understand this is how it comes out of our efforts. And we've tried to serve it up for your consideration as you look at those candidate projects. What is the existing condition safety performance? Oh, now I better understand where that comes from. What is the congestion performance for both at the intersection level that the signals are telling us and at that current and forecasted level as provided to us in the regional travel demand model. So better understanding those performance metrics and how to consider them in your contemplations for candidate projects, I think is really important. And we're here to continue to be engaged with you and help you through this process.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Hey, Paul. Paul, this is Tom. I just have a quick follow-up on Mary's comment there, having to do with modeling for these pedestrian-activated signals. You know, we have Hawks and other types throughout the region, and I'm curious how or if you can actually model those for you know, increasing or decreasing congestion certainly you should be able, I guess, to determine some data about safety, but just curious about how that might fit into a model, particularly when we're looking for performance criteria on either a corridor project that includes them or a standalone project that builds them in for the first time.
That's a great question, Tom. So our regional travel demand model doesn't really take into account those signalized pedestrian crossings in their distinct location per se. I can say that we've worked closely with jurisdictions for a good number of years, and there have been recurring efforts to consider whether hawks and other button crossings should be linked into the coordinated network. There's been field tests on that, a number of those over the years, and effectively what's been discovered is that there is some issues with compliance that kind of make planners and traffic engineers pretty uncomfortable, where we start to see pedestrians taking advantage of the gap that is presented, even if the signal is not operated or on. The crossing takes place, and then the driver comes up, and the crossing is activated, and there's no one there. So I think it's important to know that safety is paramount. As we have looked at better understanding the congestion and delay that is resulting from these types of signalized crosswalks, what we've seen through our field observations throughout the network is a pretty continuation of a pretty healthy level of service for an unsignalized intersection. Because if you look at these push button crossings, effectively it is a pedestrian crossing oftentimes at an intersection. The signal just simply gives the indication to the drivers to come to a halt and allow the pedestrian to cross. So it's behaving as a unsignalized intersection, and its level of service is still pretty darn good in the B range, level of service B. We've seen some in level of service C, depending on what kind of congestion is happening at the network. But this is maybe a delay of 15 seconds or so. So overall, it's not having huge impacts throughout the network. We would certainly like to have a better understanding, but we don't do it within the regional travel demand model. It would take us investing into more of a micro scale model to better understand how the particular time plans are impacting congestion and the vehicle loads that are going through that particular area. This is what we understand now, is what I kind of shared with you right now.
Yeah, no, I get that. And I know we've talked about it before. You know, the other kind of one-off, I guess, or occasional interruptions are probably not necessarily going to become something that we focus decisions on. But if we, say, build 4 times as many hawks and we equip all of the intersections with overrides for both buses and emergency vehicles, and you know, more or less get into a on-demand type signal system, I would think that there would be some, you know, maybe more profound reactions in the network that may not be modelable at this point, but you know, could have an impact.
Indeed, I think it's going to be important that we continue to stay involved in the management and the operation of the network. Not to say that PAG RTA are the managers or operators of the network, but how can we help support those agencies that are facing those challenges in a way that creates kind of a seamless network rather than a series of signals owned by different jurisdictions. We want to make it act and operate as a seamless network in as much as possible.
Thanks, Paul.
Tom, this is Bruce.
Go ahead, Bruce.
As one of the committee members who requested this presentation, I just want to compliment Paul and Josh and the entire team on this presentation today. I think it's been one of the most helpful and insightful ones we've had to date. I'm amazed by the level and sophistication of the analysis and the modeling that PEG is able to do. I do want to make one observation, which is following up on the questions and comments by Larry and Carolyn, and it's something that I've talked about before, and that is, these projections are based upon our look at the world as we see it today with the assumptions that we know. And as Larry suggested with the pandemic, or Carolyn with climate change, we're looking out 25 years. And I'm concerned that we provide some kind of a mechanism or some way to do mid-course correction, 10 or 15 years out. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with migration patterns or new technology or climate change and how that impacts how people move through the region. So I know it's a daunting question, but I do think we need to keep it in the back of our minds. Is there a way that we can provide some flexibility and some ability to adjust the allocation of resources going out for the next 25 years?
Hi, Paul. This is Tom Bush. I just want to compliment you and your staff as well. I mean, I thought this was a tremendous presentation. The detail complexity are just beyond comprehension to some degree. I just want to say something that I've been saying for years. I'm available to teach a course on how to get through a busy intersection without ever being pressed a button, because I use a wheelchair and there is not one button that I can point to that I can reach in order to cross either using a halt station or intersection button. But if somebody would like to know, perhaps we could put the course about how to get across the road without ever having to press a button. I'm still alive, but I've had some pretty close calls, I might say. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks for those kind words. I can tell you there's been some local work on app development so that the phone can communicate with a connected traffic signal and let the traffic signal know that there is a pedestrian present ready to cross a particular direction. So we're going to continue to work on those types of initiatives, partnering with the University of Arizona and other talented folks so that we can continue to be as ready as possible for the future of transportation technology and do better for you, Tom.
Paul, just one note. A far less expensive circumstance would just put the buttons lower, about another 8 to 10 inches in the room, instead of keep building them high. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Paul, I wanted to thank you, Paul, also, and I wanted to say a thought about Bruce's comment about flexibility. Flexibility is an interesting issue. The original RTA was intended to be very inflexible and basically requiring a vote to change anything. And I think that's a subject that we need to have some serious discussions on, because I can see a very large need at the present time to think about flexibility going forward. And the potential impact on the voting public is another issue as to whether they'd be confident in the plan if there was a lot of flexibility in it. So I think that's something we need to talk about, what the sweet spot is. Thank you.
Indeed. Paul, Arlen, I wanted a couple things. One is to follow up on everybody's commendations to you and Josh. Good presentations. But also to comment in terms of what others were saying. We talk about climate change and we talk about other changes that may be occurring. I think, and then in a sense, what Tom Bush just said, there's got to be, I think, in our thought processes, also consideration of social equity issues, access to transportation, as we plan uses that are further and further out from where people can get to without owning a car or having to have some other way of getting around, or the issues as Tom raised about the ability to access getting across the street if you're disabled, et cetera, et cetera. Those are, I think, things that it probably needs to begin in other of the planning processes that PAG is undergoing and the jurisdictions are undergoing. But I suspect that we may have to address that a little bit in here. Also, the need, I think, to figure out, in terms of what Bruce was saying, it may be that we need to identify for those things that are really rapidly changing conditions, a process and criteria, as opposed to, maybe saying these are the things that when we have to get to this, we may have to consider things. There's got to be a process to deal with it and think about it in those terms.
Great comments, Arlen. Thank you for that. I agree. We do want to do better on understanding equity as a consideration point for project development. And I guess, just to speak briefly to flexibility, I know that's a challenge. When we went through this back in 2004, 2005, the real only flexibility issue that we were able to kind of negotiate was the practitioner saying, please don't make us choose what intersections we're going to improve over the next 20 years because we know that profile is going to look different. So allow us to have a process by which we can select intersection improvements as we move forward. So that's something for consideration. How that gets balanced and figured out, that's something I'll have to leave to CAC chairs and with guidance from the Technical Management Committee to kind of step through that process and that consideration, but certainly a challenge.
Thank you.
Well, thanks, Paul and Josh, particularly the two of you for putting together this great presentation for us. As other questions occur to CAC members, feel free to forward those on through Paki, and we'll try to get those addressed so that all of us hear all of those questions and all of those answers. So if there's any final concerns about our upcoming meetings or other issues other than questions for Paul and Josh, speak now before we adjourn our meeting.
This is Kent, Mr. Chairman, Kent Bauman.
Yes,
just
Kent?
one question that was raised the last meeting, and with this growth in congestion, these forecasts, it really seems like I-10 is going to become a major issue coming through town. And the question was posed the last time: how much state support can be expected, which would then relieve the burden for funding from RTA funds? So I really think we need to understand that so that we don't go short on getting traffic across town from the northwest to the east side, Midtown, as the population seems to be growing out in those two corridors, and everybody's going to be, piling on I-10. Is that something we could get answered for the next meeting?
Probably not for the next meeting, Kent, but it is something that we're really carefully taking a look at, talking to ADOT and their funding sources. They are in kind of their planning process at this time as well, and will be able to talk to us about how much money they have coming up, what they anticipate will be their funding levels in the near future. But my guess, and maybe Farhad can jump in here with a guess as to when that would be, would be shortly after the first of the year, would be my guess. Farhad, do you want to weigh in?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Thank you. You're right on point. There has not been any additional information beyond what was submitted as the project proposals were submitted by ADOT. Again, as a reminder, if you look at the summary sheet, on the summary sheet, there are different columns that demonstrate what would be the portion of state contribution towards those proposed projects. So they've already indicated that amount. And in addition to that, they have indicated that really beyond any local funding that could leverage those projects, as the chair just mentioned, they don't have any other projected revenue to contribute to those projects at this time, and that's obviously subject to ongoing conversations. But their belief at this point is that that is what they're able to contribute towards those projects if there are going to be local funds that could help leverage implementation of those projects.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, this is Mel Cohen. I have a question. As I recall, there were a list of roads, streets that had not been on this, the list we've been looking at. And is there something going to add? I'm thinking specifically of Valencia east of Houghton. Are there other areas that are going to be considered in addition to the list we just looked at?
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, I'll attempt to answer that as well. So this is an ongoing process. We'll continue to identify any additional projects, obviously bring that into the fold. We hope to be able to have a complete list, hopefully at the next meeting. And even beyond that, I think as a committee, we're hoping that you can continue to identify and bring any potential projects to the conversation. And then even after that, when we go out to the public, we're going to continue to ask that question. We're going to want to explore what else should be considered. So that's an ongoing effort, and hopefully we'll continue to have that conversation with the community.
Yeah, and of course we have a number of projects. You talked about Valencia and specifically, Mel, and that's one which we'll need to wait and see what the city of Tucson submits, but a good portion of that project is in the city, so we'll have to wait to see what that is. All right, any other comments or quick questions?
Tom, it's Arlen. Just a basic question. What's on the agenda for next meeting? Looking ahead.
Mr. Chair, we hope to bring back additional projects, hopefully by end of November. We're anticipating to receive additional recommendations for projects, and we hope to bring that back to you and continue to provide information on any new proposed projects.
Okay, thanks.
And as I mentioned, we're putting together a little more specific information on technology, which will also start to sprinkle into our meeting, perhaps by next month, but not sure yet. Okay. Thank you all for your attention. Thanks to staff for great presentations. And we will see you again in December. Hope everyone has a safe and enjoyable Thanksgiving. And we are now adjourned.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.